So welcome back to Tufts. Isn't it so fun to be here? You step on campus and you become 19 again. Isn't it great? And your friends are 19 again too. So it's my favorite part. So I'm Yvonne Halpern-Bayevsky. I'm from the class of 84. I'm here celebrating with my roommates from the class of 1983. Our whole suite almost entirely is back together. So. And my jumbo husband, who is in 1982. I'm from the Alumni Weekend Committee. I'm chairman of the committee, and I'm on the Alumni Council as well. So I encourage all of you to become Tufts volunteers because it's just amazing. You meet just fabulous people, and we have a wonderful time. I'm also a Tufts parent, and that's a real pleasure, too. Did everyone come to the Pops last night? Wasn't that unbelievably fun? So come back. You know, the Pops is there for you every year, not just on your reunion years. And most of our events are here for you every year, not just on your reunion cycle. So do come back. And all of you will have a wonderful time at your parties tonight. I will be by most every party to say hello. And now, okay, so tell me who was in Yid Lit? Isn't that great? So our favorite professor who needs and wants no introduction, Saul.
Hold it. Quiet. Let's go. Am I up? I'm up. All right. We have to leave the lights this way because there's only one more light I can turn down, and that's too much. So that's the way it's going to be. I wanted to say that first. Second, I want to give a shout out now to the 50th reunion class. Only because, you know, you get to be my age, you have context. You come, you have context. Kids who are 12, 18, 19, they don't have context. I got context. I came here with them in '64. They showed up here with beanies on their hats, and they were told by the Dean of Women, Dean Herrick, no Coke machines in the women's dorms. It's bad for your teeth. And also, you can only wear skirts or slacks when it's nasty. Whatever. It was parietals, feet on the floor, no shacking, anything. I mean, it was when they left in '68, they were anarchists, and the place had already blown up. That's context. That's context. The irony is they also led to all the anti-academic, all the anti-student, all the anti-intellectual stuff. The next 5 years, the kids who graduated 69, 70, 71, 72, all of them participated in what became the academic insurrection on the campus. The draft, Richard Nixon said what? I don't want any more of this. And the draft ended in 1973 because the big issue was the draft. If you notice today on the bulletin, with anybody who attended the lecture of that class, the issues on campus, why the kids are protesting, they do protesting this, protesting that, protesting. What was not on that list? The war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. Why? They don't care. It's not their war. Somebody else is getting their legs blown off, and that's what's happening. You contribute your money to Wounded Warrior, and the college campuses are not in any way protesting that. That's context also. So the context of the last 50 years is fascinating. I got to read this for a bit before I get away from the script because I forget. I'm getting old. All right? This is not a one-and-done experience. You know, we've been doing this now. I give this lecture. It's online somewhere. Some of you have probably seen it, but you probably forgot it already because that's what happens. The dirty little secret of learning is forgetting, and that's what you do. But every one of these slides, every one is a 13-week semester. So there is a lot that you can learn about life. You know, the good news is it's lifelong learning. If I could press the button, I'd have every one of you now be a history major. Do anything you want. Make a living any way you want. But if you don't know the context of history worldwide, and then particularly American history, we all create our own narratives. We are Americans. I don't care who you voted for, and who I voted for is none of your business. But we all create a narrative that we want to believe. You've got your narratives. Other people have. I'm going to try to give you a value-free narrative, simply one based on facts, and then you'll determine what you want to believe and what you don't want to believe. But part of that narrative is what we think of ourselves as Americans, and what we think about American history. We are a very interesting country. We're not unique. You know, American exceptionalism, I thought it was until I read a German book 30 years ago that talked about the Deutschen Sonderweg, the German special path. Every nation thinks it has a special path and a special mission. We're different only insofar as we believe our mission was sent by God. The rest of the world is getting more and more secular, but Americans are people of faith. We are the largest Christian nation in the world. We are the largest nation of faith in the world. We have more Bibles than any country in the world, and that's who we are. You can't deny that. That's simply who we are. That's only the first point I wanted to make. So it's not one and done. You have to keep learning and pick out whichever books. My email address is here. If you have any questions and you want to pick a subject or a topic or a slide and you want further knowledge about it, you already paid your tuition. It's over. The rest is free. And as long as I'm above ground, I'm available. And it's only, so you're all just a mouse click away. If you got a question or disagree or you want to fight, that's fine. Questions afterwards, and you have to use the mics there because they're taping this whole thing. Okay. You got the email address. The conversation will continue. Okay. I'm not worried if you heard it before because you forgot most of it anyway. The American immigrant experience, it is a template for everything America is all about. We only started teaching American immigrant history in the United States in the 1950s and 60s. We didn't teach American immigration history. We taught the history of the frontier. We taught American history. We taught American stuff, everything, but not immigrant history. So it's a relatively recent topic, and it's a topic that is a template for everything about America. Integration, immigration, race, manifest destiny, the move to the West, the conquest of the country. Immigration is part of the whole template, and it'll be with your children, and it'll be with your grandchildren. It will always be a political issue because it's been a political issue for over 300 years in this country. It's who we are and how we understand ourselves. The one thing that's common with everybody is that very few people came to this country because they were doing terrific somewhere else. We are by nature, somebody said, well, my father was a millionaire in Germany, he decided to come over. If you want to believe that narrative, you can. But most of the people who came over here were desperate losers. They came because they had no choice or they were simply desperate. You don't undertake a 5,000-mile journey bringing your family over because it's fun and games or you want to have a little. You come because you're desperate. And that has been the attraction of the United States for over 350 years. The desperate people want to come here. It's still the place they want to come. You can build a 50-foot fence. Somebody will build a 51-foot ladder. And that's simply the way it is, because there's money to be made. Well, no, that's not a political statement. That's simply a statement of fact. No, because the other part is because there's profit to be made in human trafficking, more now than ever before, and human trafficking is the greatest single source of illegal money around the world now, more than arms, more than drugs. It's the traffic in human beings that people make the most money, because it also leads to pornography, child pornography, prostitution, worldwide, everything. It's human trafficking that leads to all of that. So immigration is a topic within a context that you simply have to understand within this country. Okay, so it's always going to be with us. It's never going to be going away. The recent presidential election exacerbated the subject. It became a topic, and it will continue to be a topic no matter how you perceive this thing. Just understand the nature of the role that immigration has played within the context of American history. Full disclosure, my mother came over to this country when she was a teenager, right after World War I. It's about 15, 16 years old. She came over. Her manifest is all there. Ellis Island has a terrific database. Everybody was coming from Europe going through Ellis Island, Galveston, Baltimore, but Ellis Island was the big place. She's there. My Aunt Bertha is registered there, having picked her up. Everything is there. Nothing on my father. He says he remembers coming over about 3 years later, about 1921, 22. He says he remembers coming over on a big boat and getting into a little boat, and then getting rowed somewhere. He also remembers there were cases of Scotch whiskey on the deck. What's the context? Prohibition. My father came after Prohibition, and he was an illegal immigrant. He got in. His family paid $5, $10, whatever it was. It was $15 to come regular. They maybe paid $20 or $5 or $10, whatever, to get my father into this country as a teenager. He got here. He got into the little boat, and they rowed into Brooklyn. Then 10 years later, with illegal papers, they became citizens of the United States. My mother and father couldn't read or write. They were illiterate. They never went to school a day in their lives. This is it. They produced 2 children. One became a lawyer, the other became a teacher, and that's it. I'm a first gen, and my parents were typical people who would be locked out. And under normal circumstances, if they hadn't gotten in when they got in, 1919, 1922, they never would have made it. Because the door shut in the 1920s. We'll talk about that when we get there now. Okay? We're ready. All right. So that's all the prelim. What else is left over in the first slide? What we've learned about ourselves as Americans, God, immigration, race, and who gets to vote. The search for an American historical narrative. What's the narrative that you want to believe? You got 280. My mother heard me lecture once in my life and sat in the corner up there. So this room has very personal meaning for me. She came down and said, they listened to you. She couldn't believe it. She could not believe that anybody would pay attention to me. She brought me up, and I might have told the story in the Yiddish class. I don't remember, but it all comes back to me now. She couldn't read or write, so I give her my report card. A's, 97, 98. I had great grades. She'd look at it and say, your brother's doing better. I could not win with that woman. I could not win, but she sat up there and came down and said, they listened to you. I couldn't believe it. All right. These are the candidates for the presidential election of the last one we had. Every one of them traces back to an immigrant. How many of you are born outside the United States? Raise your hands. Not very few. Well, 2%, 3%. How many of you have one parent born outside the United States? Look at okay, keep all the hands up. How many have at least one grandparent? Woo! One great-grandparent. How many hands are we going to get up? I don't think we have a Penobscot, Iroquois, or Wampanoag Indian here. So how many hands are we going to get up? Everybody. All of us came from somewhere else, and usually in the same condition. This is the narrative that I'm going to tell you about. This is the narrative that I teach. If you could challenge it, fine. 1620, be like us or else. That the door to coming to America has always been perilous. We never welcomed people. Whatever Emma Lazarus said on the Statue of Liberty, this has not been a welcoming country. But then it's part of human nature. How many years of human history have we got? What is the recorded history of humanity? 6,000 years? That's all we got. And what have we had in 6,000 years? Hating somebody else. That's simply been the narrative, and that's undeniable also. 1620, the Pilgrims seek religious freedom in the New World. What are they leaving? This is a lovely picture. They're on their knees, they're praying, everything looks great. It's a nice picture. Look at that. Oh, thank God, right? They're carrying each other, thanking God. The ship is offshore. Wonderful. Right. What are they leaving behind? 1620. Poverty. Well, more than poverty. Persecution of whom by whom? What's going on in 1620? What is the war about which you know the least? John? Right, the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. That takes us back another context. 100 years before that, in 1517, October 31st, is there one Lutheran in this room? What synod are you?
Well, I'm not anymore.
A fallen away. I got one Lutheran. I got a lapsed Lutheran. Thanks a lot. All right? But I asked her what synod, why a synod? Because the Lutherans in this country have split into about 30 different groups. Missouri Synod, Illinois Synod, Wisconsin Synod. They hate each other. They don't talk to each other. Right? These people are leaving a war in Europe where it's Protestant versus Catholic, but already Calvin was drowning people in Geneva. He was drowning other dissenters, other Protestants. So the Protestants were already fragmenting. There are, in the world, 9,000 Protestant denominations. There are probably 1,000 in the United States. How did they get to be 1,000? They found something to dislike in each other. Here, these people come, and they're looking for religious freedom, and they're thankful. They're on their knees. Everything is wonderful. 40 years later, this is Mary Dyer. She's English. She's Protestant. She happened to quake when she went into church. She shook in the presence of God. So they called her a Quaker. She's hanged on the Boston Common in 1660. She wouldn't shut up, so they nailed her tongue to the roof of her mouth to shut her up. And, you know, can you deny it? There's the monument, the Boston Common. It's up there now. Go up to the Boston Common, under the State House. It's by the tree that they hanged her on. They hanged 3 Quakers on the Boston Common. Then a few years later, they were hanging people in Salem. Were any of these people Catholics, Muslims, or Jews? They were all Protestants. They were all Protestants. So the capacity for people who are very much like each other to hate each other seems to be as part of the human condition. Freud was a lousy doctor, but he was a pretty good sociologist. And he talked about something called the narcissism of minor difference, that people who are very much alike can learn to hate each other until they find somebody else who's a little bit different, and the two who are hating each other will like each other and hate the third person. The best example of that is Yugoslavia, where the Croatians and the Serbians, who have identical DNA, they're the same, they even speak the same language. What's the difference between Serbo-Croatian spoken by, or written by Serbians, and Serbo-Croatian written by Croatians? One is in the Cyrillic alphabet, the other is in the Roman alphabet, and they hate each other. But they stopped hating each other after the war, the breakup of Yugoslavia. They got together and hated Bosnians. The Muslims are a slightly different DNA, but they're overwhelmingly European. There was some intermarriage with other Ottoman Turks, but mostly it's the same people, the same everything, but through different religions, and they've learned they thought Tito was the first Yugoslavian, and he was the last Yugoslavian. That was it. But Mary Dyer, very interesting example. It was in the United States, we didn't have enough Catholics. It wasn't the United States, it was America. This is the 17th century. It was Protestants versus Protestants, and America has been, and probably will continue in some degree to be a theocracy. It's a Christian country. There are at least 40 million evangelicals today, and they can make a big footprint. But from the beginning, this is the way it was. The 17th century theocracy. Harvard was, and the universities reflected it. Harvard was for the Congregationalists. Yale was for the Calvinists. The people at Harvard said, you're not religious enough. We're going to New Haven and make it a really religious state. They were drowning Baptists on the banks of the Charles River, so they left town and went to a town they called what? Providence. They were Providence. Mwah. Providence, and they went to Brown. They created Brown University for the Baptists. Princeton, they were convinced that the evangelical Presbyterians were convinced that Christ was going to return to New Jersey. Down they went. Right. I mean, what is America? What is America to these dissidents? I mean, what did Luther introduce into this new religion? It was a reform of Catholicism. But it was he called it the evangelische Kirche, die evangelische. What does he mean by evangelisch? What do we mean by evangelical? What are we waiting for? Any second. It's like and Luther grooved on the letters of Paul. Why did he pick Paul? Because the second coming, any minute. Any minute. When these people got to America, they said, Christ will be here in a second. And they were waiting and expecting, and so they wanted to be where they wanted to be and be ready for this. So they went down. Evangelical Presbyterians, and Presbyterianism, Baptism, Calvinism, all believed in predestination. It's all done already. They picked that up from Luther, and then they picked it up really from Calvin. They said, don't bother fighting. God's will. Doesn't make any difference. All you have to do is have faith, and it's already been decided if you're going to be saved or not. It's over. Forget it. You're born. The Anabaptists didn't believe that. They believed you should be rebaptized as an adult. They burned them. They hanged them. They flayed them alive. Forget Anabaptists. They didn't like that at all. William and Mary was for the Anglicans, and they were Catholic until the big stupor in England. He was a great Catholic, Henry VIII. He was the biggest Catholic. He was loyal. They called him the defender of the faith. He was the man that Pope Leo X went to until Leo said, no, you're not going to be able to do this. And then he broke with the church, chopped off Sir Thomas More's head and said, I'm going to do it my own way, and founded the Church of England, which is still just a form of English Catholicism. So the Anglicans were William and Mary. There were very few Catholics who came in the first 50, 60, 70 years, and Georgetown was created for them because nobody wanted them in their school. The devil is alive in New England. They were hanging witches in Salem in 1693. Who got hanged? All Protestants. They were hanging each other. It's still to this day not quite 50% of all Americans believe in Satan. Not quite. So if you live within an hour of an ocean and you think you understand America, you're probably wrong. You know, get out of the bubble that you're in and find out what the rest of America is all about. It's somewhere in Branson, Missouri, or Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm not sure where, but chances are it's not your local community if you think you are just a liberal community of do-gooders or whatever. We have a capacity for this, which we've always had. That's why Donald Trump is as American as apple pie. And that's the narrative, I'm afraid. The great Protestant surge, this was all Protestants, from 1620 roughly to 1820, and it was a struggle. They fought with each other, they killed each other. In the meantime, what are they doing in these 200 years? Moving west. Why? God's will. It's manifest destiny. The destiny of us to conquer this wilderness and take this country to a nation of faith. The little colleges were being founded like crazy, all faith-based, hundreds of Methodist schools, Baptist schools, Presbyterian schools. Tufts is what? Universalist. They're nice, you know. Why? Because the Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists all believe that we're saved, but you are going to hell. What's nice about universalism? Everybody's going to get saved. They were nice people. Everybody, all universalists are going to get saved. So nobody liked them because they didn't like that message. Okay, religious conflict and language conflict. Doesn't have to be just religion. Language is a big thing. It's still a big thing. Learn English. If you can't speak English, you don't belong in this country. My grandmother was here 44 years. She learned one word, color picture. She loved Technicolor movies. That's the only word she ever learned. So is it going to be English? The Germans are still the largest DNA population in the United States. There are still more Germans than there are any other ethnic group of DNA. More than Latinos, more than anything. The Germans started coming, they continued coming, and never stopped coming, and they poured into this country. But so the language, and they were a bit isolationist. They went to Philadelphia. They got neighborhoods called Germantown, you got Rittenhouse Square, you got Muhlenberg College, Gettysburg. You got Germans who were, and they were Anabaptists, Wiedertäufer, as they call them in German, and they loved their language. There were more German newspapers in Philadelphia in the early 18th century than there were English newspapers. The street names were in German. Benjamin Franklin was apoplectic. He hated the Germans. Read his diaries and his memoirs. He called them swarthy, they're dark, they will not learn English, they don't belong in this country. He hated the Germans. He says they're worse than the blacks, because he was no friend of Negroes either. Blacks he hated. I mean, Franklin, these were all our founding fathers. Either they were slaveholders or they were northern people who didn't like the other people. So the Germans were particularly, the Dutch were located only in New York City for a little while, then they got beaten up. The French were pouring down from the north, and they came down. So they were all gathering in Bernie Sanders' country, the Northeast Kingdom. So the British wanted to call it Green Mountain, the Germans wanted to call it Grünberg, and the French won out. Vermont, Green Mountain. So the French won out. So language was a big part of all of this. Vermont wins it, but the Germans kept coming anyway. They didn't stop, and they were going everywhere. In 1750s, it's still America. It's not the United States. The British made a social policy move. They had arrested everybody who was a debtor. The English farming system collapsed. The Scotch-Irish Presbyterian, lowland Scotch-Irish Presbyterians all went bankrupt, couldn't make their payments, and the English courts decided we're going to put them in jail. But they didn't just put the debtor in jail, they put the whole family in jail. It was one of those great examples of bad social policy. Everybody went to jail, families by the truckload. By the 1750s, the English jails were overflowing. They didn't know what to do. They said, we got to empty the jails. So they opened up the jails, put them on boats, and shipped them to the American colonies. Right? The Americans in 1750 are in the 13 states along the coast. They don't want these people. They don't even let them stay overnight. They hate them. Get rid of them. In England, they were followers of William and Mary, the first Protestant king and queen. After the Stuarts fell apart, they turned to England. They found a distant relative and said, we'll offer the kingship of England to the husband and wife, William and Mary. They were Protestants, and the Catholics made fun of them and called these Scotch-Irish Presbyterians Billy's boys, because they used the term of mockery. They came to the United States, to America, were utterly unwelcomed here, and they pushed them into Appalachia, through the water gaps, out of the cities, get rid of them, push them further west, push them up against the Indians. And they pushed them up against the Native Americans, let them have the conflict, and these are the people that became the hillbillies. They are a big factor right now again. If you've read any of the several books written trying to explain President Trump's victory, how he put the coalition together that got him his victory, the white, poor Appalachia was a major component of it all. And so it's something just to study and understand who these people are who felt that they were ignored and that he spoke to them. Whatever the psychology of it was, the hillbilly vote, whatever we call them, crackers, rednecks, never a nice name. They're looked upon by the rest of Americans as sort of, Beverly hillbillies. They looked upon like Ned Clampett and the rest of the, we had Green Acres. I mean, you think of the television programs that they came out in the 60s and 70s that dealt with these kinds of people. Hee-haw, hee-haw, and we grew. Hollywood and the television industry said, we can make money by making fun of these people. It was hee-haw, Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, always a smart person dealing with a bunch of dummies. And that became the image of the American hillbilly till they started voting. And then we got out. So 1790, we're now the United States. It's now the United States. A congressman from Connecticut gets up and says, it's time to end this. We're all filled up. The first anti-immigration, first restrictive immigration law in the history of the United States. 1790, we're all filled up. The only people who should be allowed to come in are free white persons only. And he excluded the Germans as not white. And he said, and of course, we mean yellow people. They don't come in at all. They could never be citizens. He had a codicil added to it, said no yellow person could ever become a citizen, no Asian ever become a citizen of the United States. The law passed overwhelmingly. Supreme Court then turned it, it said you had to be 14 years in the country to become a citizen. Supreme Court modified it, but many of the parts of the 1790 law stayed on the books for 250 years. So the 1790 law was the first restrictive immigration. He said on the floor of the Congress, the barbarous German tongue is everywhere. This was right after the vote at the University of Pennsylvania to make German the second official language of the university. It failed by one vote, or Penn would have been bilingual. That's how many Germans were in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. Okay, then the nation suddenly wasn't filled up. It's 1803. What happens? The Louisiana Purchase. Did Thomas Jefferson ask the Native Americans if they minded being part of the United States? No. Any more than we asked them in the part in the Treaty of 1783 where Britain seceded a huge piece to the United States. We just kept adding. Now the country becomes 3 times its size. You say it's all a wilderness. Well, actually it was kind of interesting because about 80% of the Native American Indian population on the east were dead. What killed them? Disease. The bugs, bacteria. We killed them with our own infections, and they were dying like flies. There's this very interesting book called 1491. If you haven't read it yet, 1491, most of them were dead already. By whatever the people coming from Europe in the century before, the sailors came and they left their bugs there, and the Indians, the Native Americans, died like in huge numbers. They've already found huge numbers of people. They've done DNA studies. They see what disease killed them. But we get the Louisiana Territory, and here we got the United States is now 2.5, 3 times as big as it was. The problem is Europe is running out of Protestants. There are no more Protestants left in Europe to come and fill this territory. When Lewis and Clark made the trek, they said, this is enormous. And they said, where the heck are we going to get enough people to fill this country up? So they had to go down a level. That down level meant, and the memories are still clear, even though it was the 17th century when Europe settled a little bit of its Protestant and Catholic hatred, the Christians killing Christians was an idea that was so embedded in Protestantism you couldn't get it out. This is a cover from C.V. Wedgwood's wonderful book on the 30 Years' War. Look at that picture. It looks like a nice little picture of one guy hanging or two guys and a priest. This was a picture of a Catholic army coming in and hanging all the Protestant men. The other way happened too. Protestant armies came in and hanged all the Catholics. The only thing is, this is not the way it was. That's the way it was. They were hanging trees. They found all the men, whether they were Protestant or Catholic, and just hanged them all. Or chopped off their arms and legs and floated the bodies down the river. Protestants and Catholics all doing the same butchery. It was slaughter. And it was a slightly mechanized war. The 30 Years' War, there were already guns, and you could kill people in large numbers. It was the largest number of casualties in Europe up until World War I. That's a long time when you think about it. So who comes over to the United States now? Where do they find their poor people? In Ireland. And they're not lowland Scotch-Irish Presbyterians. They are bona fide Roman Catholics. The Pope and all that implies. So the Irish immigration, 1820 to 1870. If you go home and Google American newspaper cartoons in the 19th century, anti-Irish, you'll find anything that you need to find, because they were called maggots, they were called vermin, they were called garbage, they were called whatever. Irish help wanted, no Irish need apply. That simply was the way it was. You can clean toilets, you can clean the streets, but other than that, we don't want you. They were trying to become white because they weren't called white. They came over on what they call coffin ships. 20 to 40% of the Irish who came over died on shipboard. They'd stop, do what they did to the slaves. Throw them overboard. You know, throw the storm, throw them overboard. What the hell? Then they get into Boston Harbor, New York Harbor, and leave them there for another week or two. So more of them died. And then the ones that could stagger off came in, and they were treated like vermin and garbage. What they were. It was 1820 to 1870. It lasted right through the Civil War. They went from boat to battlefield. There are examples of American women waiting on the piers in New York City in 1863. When an Irish mother gets off the boat with 10 children, the husband might already be here. She was going to look for him. She'd come with 10 kids. The youngest was 7, 8, or 9. And the American mother with a $300 in silver in her hand would say, here's $300 in silver. Give me your 3 youngest children. Why? Again, what was the threat to reasonably well-to-do Americans? The draft. It was the draft. But what was the law? Certainly Lincoln knew about it, and Lincoln said, well, we'll write a law that says what? If we can get somebody to take the place, it's okay. Minimum $100 in silver. Got up to $300 per person, but that's the law of the land. You could buy your way out. It's amazing to go to Harvard and see all the signs of the people who fought in the war, how few fought in the Civil War. They simply were able to buy their way out. You didn't have to go. And so the Irish mother would give 3 kids, the youngest 3, and where did they wind up? On the battlefield at Gettysburg, doing what? But what are you going to do with a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid? Fife and drums. Then, I think it was around July 4th to 10th, they posted the casualties of Gettysburg in New York City, and the Irish mothers went crazy. It's the revolt of the Irish mothers. You'll find that in Google also, or the urban revolt in New York City after the Battle of Gettysburg. So who do poor people usually attack? Other poor people. So they lynched blacks. They lynched the few Chinese they could find. They burned down a black orphanage. It was mayhem in New York City, and the police sort of stayed aside till the National Guard came in. But the Irish, after the 1860s and 1870s, began earning their whiteness. You could eventually become white if you were sufficiently white to start. But if you weren't white, you were invisible. Color has always been an issue. You can't avoid it. There's no narrative you can create that says that color isn't a major force in American public life or in American history. If you were black, you had slavery. It could be justified in the Bible, and it was, in many Baptist churches all over the South and the North, because there were anti-miscegenation laws in all of the states of the United States, except 3, I think. So there was slavery. Dred Scott, 1857, says what? Each black counts for 3/5 of a white, because they were trying to get their House of Representatives straightened out. Then came the war. The war might well not have been fought as far as the blacks were concerned. Reconstruction, the period between 1865 and 1877, they were going to try to see what they could do. They couldn't do anything. Reconstruction failed. It failed, and the war, as I said, might not have even been fought. Because after that, you got separate but equal. Then 1897, Plessy versus Ferguson, the Jim Crow laws, and the blacks were toast. Until when? Well, it took another, 1967, we still had anti-miscegenation laws on the books in 14 states. If you were yellow, they brought you over in large numbers to build the Great Western Railroads, and those that survived that crawled on their hands and knees to the Chinatowns of the West and formed Chinatowns. They went, they didn't even like to be with the white folks. They wanted their laundry done differently, so they separated the laundry. They created their own system. But we created exclusionary acts. As soon as the railroad was completed in 1869, we created the Chinese and Japanese exclusionary acts that said they can't come in anymore, and they're all over. The ones that were in, they stayed. If you were red, you had disease, futile wars, the Trail of Tears. What's the Trail of Tears? New book out just called about the Cherokee Nation. You know, that was when Andrew Jackson, the Supreme Court, the Cherokees had treaties. The Cherokees said, we have treaties with the Americans, and the Supreme Court said these treaties are inviolate. They can't be broken. Andrew Jackson said, try and stop me. And he took all the Cherokee Indians in 2 states, Alabama and Georgia, and marched them where? Oklahoma. I think there were only 27,000, but about 19,000 made it, about 8,000 died on the road, and all of a sudden the Cherokees of Alabama and Georgia are in Oklahoma. So you were nothing. You were on the reservations. If they found that there was oil or gold or something on those reservations, they took it away from you. So the American Indian, that story will never fully be told or never fully be understood, but it's what we were. If you were brown, we didn't grab them until when? The Mexican-American War, 1846, where we grabbed what? Texas and California, and everything up to the top of the Colorado River. I mean, that's all of Mexico. We took about 1/3 of Mexico, and so we grabbed it, and that became manifest destiny. That became what was going to be what America was all about. If you were Irish Catholic, you were not white yet. They were the last of the big immigrants, and they hadn't made it quite yet in this early part. What was the meaning of manifest destiny? From Lewis and Clark to the Spanish-American War, from sea to shining sea. I mentioned the Spanish-American War because what was America like? I mean, what was it all about? This is what it was all about. How did America get put together? You got the original 13 colonies. Then came the part that we got from Britain in 1783. Then came the Louisiana Purchase, then the Texas annexation, Mexican secession, 1848. We were taking it all until we got where? That was God, from sea to shining sea. God shed his light on thee. It was us. It was God's will. And that was what a driving force was in American history. We took it. The only thing is, and there's this great William Jackson Turner, this American historian who was at Wisconsin and ended up at Harvard in the second half of the 19th century and early 20th century, when he says, our great impetus came from the frontier. Once we've closed the frontier, we'll never be the same nation again. Well, what happened in 1898? Hey, we went to Hawaii, gave it to the Dole Pineapple Company, fine. Then we kept going. President McKinley, who prayed twice a day on his knees for his entire life, said God spoke to him and said, we must civilize the Philippines. They're barbarians. And off we went to the Philippines. So this very interesting book called American Empire, just written by a Brit named A.G. Hopkins, 900 pages, talks about, America, we like to say we're not a colonial nation. We have done what we have done, and if you examine it, you can examine it. But this was our greatest triumph, the building of America. I had a kid come to me the other day to ask me if I would sign the Boycott Israel document that says we'll boycott, the Tufts University should boycott it. I said, I will sign it. Yes, I will sign it when the United States gives Alabama and Georgia back to the Cherokee. I'll be the first one to sign, because that's not going to happen. And America is what America is. I'm a patriot. I love this country, but we took it from everybody else. That's simply the narrative of what happened. We didn't negotiate, and any time we did negotiate, we screwed them. That was it. So we took whatever we wanted and we built this country. The Israelis are probably going to do the same thing. Now, what was the vision? A nation triumphant. This was a very popular lithograph. You can see it better this way. But there she is, Columbia. Nice, blonde, big bosom, carrying a book, the Bible under her arm. She's got in the other hand a telegraph line. What's the iconography here? What's this? One choo-choo train, another choo-choo train. Here's the east. Here's the ocean. She's going. Which way is she heading? What do we got? We got horsemen. We got Conestoga. We got Pony Express. We got, what are these? These are farmers. What about these guys? The miners. Here we got the Indians are running like hell. Here are the settlers, and here are the buffalo. You know, that's it. That's America. That's a nation triumphant, and we have a triumphant narrative. That's what we believe. His Promontory Point, Utah, May 10th, 1869. America is becoming a great industrial power. Now the war is over. Leland Stanford, all these people are making money. They get the land. They build the railroad. And here's the joining. This is actually a picture that was taken. There isn't a person of color anywhere here. The Chinese built it. Mel Brooks got it right. It was Chinese in Blazing Saddles. Chinese, black people, free black slaves, and if they helped build the rail. The Irish by this time were foremen on the jobs. So this was 1869. Here's a reenactment from 1969, and they added 2 black men. There and there. But everybody else, still white, right? So they're not about to genuflect to the Chinese community in 1969. Now, that's it. Immigrants kept coming, but they came from Europe, they came from Scandinavia, they came from Norway, they came from everywhere and settled in the United States. Chicago was the second largest Polish-speaking city in the world. It was also the second largest Swedish-speaking city in the world. Chicago, the industry was growing. We needed cheap labor, and we got the cheap labor. Industry was really growing. The great Gilded Age, the age of transportation, unifying the country. Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Johns Hopkins, they're all throwing their money at education, by the way. But, you know, we still needed poor people. So here we got 2 more, 1880 to 1920, the last massive wave of the 19th century. 40-year period. 2 more non-white people. The Jews and the Italians were not considered white. Now, how do you determine this? You need science. What's the science of race? Eugenics. And it's eugenics that was taught in the American university system. We taught eugenics at the great research universities. Harvard's Agassiz was teaching eugenics. To our credit, Tufts has not one course on eugenics recorded on this wonderful universalist university college that we had. We didn't do eugenics here. I went into the archives and dug around like crazy. No eugenics taught at Tufts. Everywhere else, eugenics was going crazy. Harvard led the world. The Anti-Immigration League started at Harvard, but 2 more white. Who are these people? Who are the Jews and the Italians? Tsarist May laws of 1881. It's time to leave the dirty, filthy, little communities of Jews in Eastern Europe. There were about, God knows how many, 6, 7 million Jews in Tsarist Russia. The Tsar was a monster, Alexander III. They're burning down our communities. It's time to leave. There are dead children all over the place, shtetl violence in 1905. So it's time. Enough of the shtetl. This is a good picture to see because the streets are filthy. It's disgusting way of life. They got to get out. Enough of the shtetl, so they're preparing to leave. How do you get out? You walk. So they started walking out, and you walk out of Russia. You walk out, you get out of the Pale, you get to the Baltic, you find a ship. It was anywhere from $5 to $15 if you came over. And you came over, where did they put the poorest of the poor on those ships? Steerage. The Germans call it Zwischendeck, between the decks. So there was a tiny little narrow space. Nobody could even stand. They were fleeing Italian poverty at the same time. So the Jews and the Italians would come out. This is luxurious sailing, steerage class. And they're all standing. There's double-deck bunks. You know, and it's a general idealized picture of what steerage looked like. They brought their own food and they made it. They came over by the thousands. Occasionally, they let the women go up on deck to get some fresh air. There were a couple of great American photographers who were taking pictures. Here you can see the crowds Italian steerage class ready for Ellis Island, 1892. That's the year Ellis Island opened up. Ellis Island opened up in 1892, and there's the Statue of Liberty, and Admiral Lazarus's great words are there, but this was not yet a welcoming country. Ellis Island opened in 1892 to handle the masses of Jews and Italians who were pouring in. They arrived in Ellis Island in huge numbers. They started looking for reasons to shut them down. There were already immigration leagues, anti-immigration voices that were being raised. They didn't want these people. It started in the universities primarily, but they were destroying the white Anglo-Saxon base of the American population, and they didn't like it. So they were trying to figure out ways to keep these people out. Italian families were arriving without a father. They were saying these were degenerate people. They weren't really healthy. Little Israel and Little Italy, the Jews and the Italians were forced together. They lived together on the Lower East Side of New York. Mostly, there were millions and millions there, living in dirt and filth and ghettos, horses dying on the street. It was a miserable, wretched existence, and that's what the Lower East Side of New York really looked like for a long time. Abandoned Jewish children, 1893, a picture by Jacob Riis. There were the largest number of abandoned children were Jews. The largest number of orphanages were Jews. The largest number of bordellos were Jews. You know, so the Jews create their own narrative. We're the people of the book. We do this. We read. You believe what you want to believe, you know, and you do what you want to do, and you create your own narrative. But the history of abandoned children, orphanages, prostitution, crime, and degeneracy on the Lower East Side of New York is a Jewish and Italian narrative. So believe whatever you want, but the historical document does not allow you to really advocate. Italian husbands without wives, 5-cent lodging. Jacob Riis, who was a Danish Protestant, was a great photographer. The foul core of New York slums. I mean, it was a miserable, wretched, maybe I can do this still and keep them out. Tenement life, 1900, it was filthy, just horrible. The Tenement Museum on 62 Orchard Street is beautiful compared to anything that really existed at the time. Here's a new, I don't give you much text to read, but it's big enough for you to read. From the Herald New York Tribune, September 15th, 1898. The neighborhood where these people live is absolutely impassable. They claim to have been driven out of Poland and Russia. The neighborhood is the eyesore of New York City, perhaps the filthiest place on the Western continent. A Christian could not live there because he will be driven out by the stench and dirt. Cleanliness is an unknown quantity to these people. They cannot be lifted up to a higher plane because they do not want to be. That's eugenics. They are incapable of being lifted up. They incapable, what's the big A word? Of assimilating. They will never assimilate. And this was the wisdom of the Tribune and almost all of the Protestant establishment. Little Italy, not much better. It's hopeless to think of civilizing them. This is earlier from the New York Times, 1875. They are extremely ignorant and have been reared in the belief that brigandage is a manly occupation and that assassination is the natural sequence of the most trivial quarrel. They are miserably poor. It is not strange that they resort to theft and robbery. It is perhaps hopeless to think of civilizing them. That was the image. Now, let me ask you, there are already over 1 million Irish Catholics in the United States. Did they welcome the Italian Catholics? You could bring, the literature would say, bring home anybody. Bring home a Swede, bring home a Polak, bring home a Yid. Just don't bring home a Wop. No Italians wanted. So I had a girl in class about 6 years ago named Emily Kenny, bright, beautiful, red-headed Irish girl. She says, now I understand why my grandmother wouldn't even let a can of SpaghettiOs in the house. They hated Italians so much. Now, there were also 250,000 German Jews in America. Did the German Jews welcome the East European Jews? Forget about it. They all hated each other, and they didn't want any part of these East European Jews. They brought bad things to the country. They brought women's liberation, equality, trade unionism. They brought unwanted ideas, child labor. They were getting involved in politics. That's Yiddish and English. Abolish slavery, abolish child labor. They fought like, they were also terrorists. This is the new Los Angeles Times building blown up in 1910 by 2 Irish, and they used the word terrorists. 20 people were killed. In New York City, right after Sacco Vanzetti's arrest, the New York Stock Exchange was blown up by Italian terrorists. 30 people were dead. So terrorism, urban violence, as American as apple pie. Here is the document of the Immigrant Restriction League. It's too small, perhaps, for you to read, but it may be worthwhile. Immigration Restriction League founded 1894 at Harvard, the triumph of an academic eugenics and the vocabulary of testing. Testing had just become a big thing. This says, this little text here, the object of this league shall be to advocate and work for the further judicious restriction of stricter regulation of immigrants, to issue documents and circulars, solicit facts and information on the subject, hold public meetings, and to arouse public opinion to the necessity of a further exclusion of elements undesirable for citizenship or injurious to our national character. It is not an object of this league to advocate the exclusion of laborers or other immigrants of such character and standards as they fit in to become citizens. So they were out there, they were looking to close the doors. How do we do it? It spread like wildfire in the country. You know, if you happen to be not a fan of President Trump, the good news is the country is divided. In the 1920s, 90% of the American people accepted this policy. It was overwhelmingly popular to shut the doors. And when the doors were shut, everybody was happy. They'll never assimilate. There were 12 Yiddish newspapers in New York City in 1900. It turns out within 50 years, they're all gone. But they said these people will never learn English. They'll never learn. And this was testimony made before Congress. Testers, Stanford, Binet, all the great tests said these people are incorrigible. They will never become Americans. The letters to the editor. This is an English translation of a letter that was written in Yiddish. Dear editor, I have 4 little children and my husband has abandoned me. I speak no English and I'm all alone in this country. Please help me. This was brought into the congressional testimony. It said these are the people who are on the dole. What are we going to do with this lady? There was one positive result of this. Letters written, they didn't know who to write to. So what did they do? There was Yiddish newspapers. Who did they write to? The editor. They wrote to the newspaper. Dear editor, help! What did it create? Letters to the editor. They all started in the Italian and Jewish newspapers around the turn of the century. Selling Yiddish and Italian newspapers, a huge business. The kids were out there selling 1905 more Italian and Jewish newspapers than English newspapers in New York City. The newspaper, I like to keep it off, hit tune, Long Live America, in Yiddish. But look, they no longer can really just leave it in Yiddish. It's already working. In 1915, 1916, it's already 2 generations of people born in this country. What do they need to do? They got to transliterate it, Leben soll America, long live America. They could put the Yiddish down, Leben soll America, but he said, then just to make sure you know how good Americans we are, here's George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and the Statue of Liberty, right? They were patriots. All they wanted to be was American. Now, there was another way you could make it, sports. Sports was a big way, and the Jews and the Italians, they took to boxing. They were all small, and they were little people, and they went, but boxing was their natural métier. Between 1900 and 1940, there were 32 Jewish prize-fighting champions of the world. To throw the Italians in, there must have been 60 of them. The Jews and the Italians dominated prize-fighting. Benny Leonard was born in Benjamin Liner. His mother, if you ever found out his mother knew that he was a boxer, she'd kill him, so he changed his name. Born 1896. Barney Ross, Berdov Rozovsky, who was the grand uncle of Henry Rozovsky, the dean at Harvard for many years. Lightweight champion, born 1909 in this country. Tony Canzoneri, born 1908 in this country, won 3 titles, lightweight, middleweight, and featherweight. And then the other great sport they dominated was basketball. They were little guys, they could dribble through your legs. And they did it, and they were the great basketball players, and they were short, so they had to do what? They learned to step back and jump in the air. They invented the jump shot. They had to do that because they were smaller than their Gentile opponents, so they had to learn how to do that. But they dominated. They played anywhere. They played cage games on top of buildings, schoolyards, any play they could get a place to play. By 1930s, they were in baseball. Hank Greenberg, born 1911. Detroit Tigers, sorry, but 32-47. So it took a full generation to get him into baseball. DiMaggio, born 1914 in this country, on the cover of Time magazine. So it was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Jews and Italians made the final breakthrough into baseball. These were, but they were stereotyped. The Time magazine article on DiMaggio called him a greasy Italian. He loved spaghetti. Greenberg was a big-nosed Jew. They stereotyped him anyway. You didn't want to do that on the playing field. Everybody got on the ball field. You start yelling these names. Greenberg had what they call rabbit ears. He heard everything, and he also was 6'4.5", 230 pounds. So you call, hey, you Jew bastard, we're gonna, he'd get up there, hit a 2-run home run, come home. The game is over. He'd go into the other team dugout with a bat in his hand and say, who called me a Jew bastard? Nobody went near him because he'd kill him. He had a short trigger, heard everything, and could compartmentalize it. And Greenberg was a violent man. There was another way you could make it. Crime, right? The legacy of Little Israel, Ben Bugsy Siegel, born in Brooklyn, 1906. Meyer Lansky, born in Nepal. He was a kid when he came over, 1902. Their closest buddy was Lucky Luciano from Little Italy. Born 1897 in Sicily, but came over as a little kid. They dated each other's sisters. They went out with each other's family. They were all close cheek to jowl. The Irish had run crime until the Jews and the Italians bumped them all off. And that was it. Murder Incorporated was the killing arm of the organized crime led by Luciano, and it was 90% Jewish. More pathological Jewish. Red Levine was an Orthodox rabbi, never killed anybody from Friday night to Havdalah. After that, you were dead. But these are not made-up stories. The closing of the doors, Sacco and Vanzetti, 1920. That's it. After they killed, or allegedly killed, one of them did kill for sure. The other one would never know for sure. National Guards and restrictive immigration begins, congressional hearings, and the law starts getting written. Between 1920 and 1927, when they were executed, all the restrictive immigration laws were written. 90% of the country approved, overwhelmingly approved in the Congress. The doors were shut. That is also the beginning of illegal immigration. Who deserves to be an American? Well, back in the 20s and 30s, this was who deserved. Academic eugenics, this is the 8-1 Supreme Court vote. This was America in 1927 that declared most of these people trying to get into the United States morons and imbeciles. The Supreme Court, this book by Adam Cohn, Supreme Court, American Eugenics, the sterilization of Carrie Buck. He concentrates, ironically, on the white people in Appalachia, 70,000 of whom were sterilized or castrated. And the vote to do that was 8-1, with Oliver Wendell Holmes and Louis Brandeis approving. So that was the 1927 Buck versus Bell case for the lawyers in the audience, which has never been overturned. It's still on the book somewhere. I was American judge. This is a quote from Adam Cohn's book. Goddard administered the Binet-Simon test to newly arrived immigrants at Ellis Island in 1913. This all appeared in the Congressional Record and got startling results. He found that 79% of Italians, 80% of Hungarians, 83% of Jews, and 87% of Russians were feeble-minded. He could have included Armenians, Greeks. They all would have been in the same category. Southern Mediterranean, Eastern European. After reworking the results, he came up with figures that still defied belief. He reported that between 40 and 50% of these groups were feeble-minded with a mental age of less than 12. That was the record. That was the law. Those were the testimonies that produced the law. This was America before 1867. This is before 1967. This was America. This was the country. You were adults already when, up until 1967, there were 14 states with laws that said white people cannot marry people of another race. When Levittown was built in Long Island in 1950-55, nobody protested because the codicil in your purchase agreement said you cannot resell to a black. That's the law. Jackie Robinson was an anomaly. And Harry Truman integrating the armed services were anomalies. The land was still ready to go back to where it was in 45 and 46 and 47. And it lasted until 67. That's why the students get a little bit of a shout out because they were up to their armpits in this stuff. Before 1960, what happened? Look at the language. Racial mixing is communism. Stop the race mixing. March for the march against the Antichrist. Race mixing is communism. I mean, this was America. This picture was taken in Virginia, but it was all over the country. The North could be just as racist as the South. So this was America before the Voter Registration Act. Then anti-miscegenation laws in America had been in 41 states. Loving versus Virginia canceled the last 14, and that was 1967. Who gets to vote? Voter registration by race in 1965. Just look at this. The gaps in Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Virginia. The white percentage who voted, the black percentage who voted. The gaps, 49, 35, 48, 63, 38, 22. After the Voter Registration Act of 67, by 2004, whites, 73% whites, 72% white. Gap, look at the gaps. Much shorter. That is reflective of what probably produced some white pushback. The fact that the Voter Registration Act worked, and it was bringing on things that other people, they might not say it in public, but when they got into the voting booth, that's what happened. Now here, the idea that they'll never assimilate, a way out of the American ghetto. New York City is kind of an interesting template. What could you do? If you were prejudiced, you were a Jew, you were Italian, you were no good, you were rotten, you were not white, you still could do what? Walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. You could walk. Nobody was going to stop you. You could walk across the Manhattan Bridge. Look at the dates, though. 1863, just as the immigrant. 1905, the Queensbury Bridge, 1909. And where are they heading? They're crossing these bridges and going where? They're heading for Long Island. They're in Brooklyn. They're in New York City. They're in Queens. And they're moving further and further. They're trying to be stopped. What's the greatest example of trying to stop them in literature? The Great Gatsby, the great Tom Buchanan. Tom Buchanan, the great racist who says, hey, the white race is going down the toilet. And he's out there in Egg Harbor or wherever the hell he is saying, watch these people, they're coming. They're going to take over our country. That was 23, he wrote that. And the anti-laws were going to shut them down. But those already in. And what do? Yiddish died, Italian died. They all went to school, they spoke English. And what else did they do? Whenever they could, they changed their names and intermarried. To this day, 16% of all new marriages are interracial. Back then, Jews and Italians finding the right girlfriend somewhere and intermarriage. It's a miracle that this country does what it does. No other country does it. We don't even know how we do it, but it happens. So the path to assimilation, the educational meritocracy. In the 1930s, there were quota systems in the American colleges. Along with the laws, the immigration laws, the universities and colleges shut their doors too. Tufts did it right after Harvard and Yale. 1922, President Cousins instituted a religious quota on Jews and Catholics. Tufts Medical School refused to do it, and they got sanctioned by the accrediting agency for letting in too many Jews and too many Italians. Georgetown, NYU, and Tufts were three medical schools that were sanctioned officially for letting in too many minorities. But so, there was a path to assimilation. You had to find other schools because you weren't going to get into these schools. Now, here's this remarkable period between 1920, 1940, when the doors were closed. Here's the doors are closed. What was the luckiest thing that ever happened? College quotas and Nobel Prizes. Who's winning all the Nobel Prizes, even after World War I? The World War I, the Germans got the crap kicked out of them at Versailles. They lost patents, they lost industry, they lost everything. 1920, 21, what are they still doing? Winning Nobel Prizes. You could not stop the Germans from having the best scientists in the world. They were winning a third, 40%, 50% of all the Nobel Prizes right through the 1920s after they had lost the war. And then comes 1933, and I called it Hitler's gift. Hitler's gift was Einstein, Fermi, Szilard, and the bomb. The Jews get fired. If you're married to a Jew, even if you were a Lutheran and you thought you were a Lutheran, he would find out that you were a Jew, and you lost your job at the German university. The American universities didn't want him. Tufts, the medical school, saw the opportunity. Sam Prodger was dean of the medical school, a Jew, and Joe Pratt was president of the hospital. He was a Gentile, said, we got a chance of a lifetime. They went to the Rockefeller Foundation said, help us. Rockefeller said, we'll give you all the money you want. Bring them over. We'll pay for the transportation. We'll pay for their labs. You got them. And Tufts Medical School hired 14 refugee Germans, brought them over, and we suddenly got accredited. So medical school, nobody did it as well as the Tufts Medical School. We got the bomb. I mean, we got the bomb only because we had a couple of immigrants in. The universities didn't want to do this kind of thing. Stanford had very few people involved in basic research at that time. So we win World War II, we win with immigrant scientists. To this day, America's won 350 Nobel Prizes, 150 are from foreign-born scientists who come to America. We are still the place where they want to be. Why? Because their own university systems, they all work for the state. In America, the faculty don't work for anybody. They're ungovernable, and they can do whatever they want, and they like that. So we win the war, and then begins the American golden age of higher education, 45 to 75, the American golden age. The doors are open to all. Interesting, I put this in just as an afterthought. People can't stand the idea that the campuses are... Everybody was happy in the 30s and 40s. What were the movies what did Hollywood make for movies in the 30s, right up to the 60s and 70s? They made musicals, Football Life with Desi Arnaz on campus playing ball, Jack Oakey, the Marx Brothers in Horse Feathers. How many of you saw Marx Brothers? 1932. Then the big movie of 1940, New Rock the All-American. Ronald Reagan plays George Gipp. I mean, it's really... We love our college, we love our football, but it has nothing to do with intellectuals. Zero. They all look like Edward Everett Horton wearing a mortarboard, and they make fun of him. They're all laughed at, and so they're all alike. The faculty are all Protestant. They're all male. I met a woman the other day who kept a letter that said, Dear Miss Hennessy, she just got a PhD from Harvard. Thank you very much for your letter. The English department at Tufts does not hire women. Yours truly, Harold Blanchard. The chairman of the department could write a letter like that in 1959. Right? It does not hire women. Tufts English department hired only white Protestant males. They made one mistake in 1954 when they hired somebody named Sylvan Barnett because they thought he wore a bow tie and they thought he was a wasp. He turned out to be a closet Jew. Then he hired McCabe, the first out-of-the-closet Catholic, and Michael Fixler, the first anarchist Jew, onto the faculty, and the whole place blew up. We got excellent. We got better. But what went? What do you lose when you have diversity? It's one of the great paradoxes of life on campus. You want a nice, calm campus? What do you want? Everybody the same. You want trouble? Get diversity. And so we got diversity and we got trouble. But it's made us the greatest educational nation in the world. In spite of our nuttiness, we are. Here's the gaps. That when immigration was shut off, then Kennedy started bringing in the Irish again in the 1990s, and everything, he made exceptions. Where are we today as a nation of immigrants? Who wants to come? Yeah, but who? No, not everybody. President Trump said the other day, the Norwegians, we love them. They're all over the place. Are the Norwegians trying to come? The Europeans, the Northern Europeans have bought into what? Social democracy. Take our money, give us nice life, clean trains, and we don't mind not being real capitalists. So who wants to come? The losers still want to come. The wretched, the miserable, the poor, right? What's the difference? The race issue once again. The people who want to come are people of color. Right? Now, the most popular second-generation name for Latino children born in the United States is Kevin and Ashley. What do they want to be? They want to be Americans. They got to figure it out. Kevin and Ashley, right? Marriages in America is 16% interracial. So we are doing something that no other country in the world can do. We don't even know how we do it. The biggest business, as I said the first moment, is human trafficking. Again, show me a 50-foot fence, and I'll show you a 51-foot ladder. We will never keep people from trying to get into this country. For whatever reason, we are the place they want to be. So Some things never change. Have we had a white rebellion? Probably. Be like us or else. And it's very hard for somebody from Nigeria to look like us. And, you know, it's just the way life is. The presidential candidates and some things just never change. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Woo. Okay, okay. All right, okay. If we have any questions, we got microphones. We got to use the microphones. So if anybody wants to argue and not get too hot about it, I'm ready. Looks good so far. If you give me 5 more seconds, you're out of here. There's a question. All right. Shh, 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 shh. All right, hold on. We got to get the mic. Barbara, wait. You got to get the microphone. They're taping it. You're going to be on video.
Hey, is this live? Yeah. So now I'm completely depressed because what you said is that our entire history, we've hated each other. So instead of thinking of the current moment as an anomaly, we have to think of it as part of a continuity.
Absolutely.
If that's the case, how the hell do we change it?
Well, as I said, the good news is the country's divided. 70, 80 years ago, there was no division. Keep these people out. Everybody, you know, the presidents got reelected by overwhelming majority. Holt Coolidge, Harding Coolidge, and Hoover. That was what the country wanted.
But what do you make of Obama then?
And then nothing happened. Well, I can't figure out. Somebody's going to have to write books about figuring out how he got elected and how he got reelected. But even FDR did nothing about race or immigration or anything. He kept the door shut. He couldn't do anything. He knew the country was owned by somebody else. He said, Eleanor, you do it. But, you know, you should feel better, Barbara, because half the country disagrees with the other half. That's good news. For this country, that's good news. Because Manifest Destiny, the conquest, there were very few people who were taking the side of the American Indian in the 19th century. Yes.
Hi. Barbara and I were actually freshman year roommates, so I get to follow her around.
You could very well. So use the mic.
Yeah. It's been my observation that the majority of immigrants that come here by boat or foot or whatever are the ones that have a drive and an initiative and the will to make it. And I just wonder if that's borne out by evidence.
The United States, if I'm correct, the United States is not a welcoming nation. The number of people who fall through the safety net, which is very largely woven, is enormous. I mean, I got relatives who never made it in this country, changed their names, disappeared, dumped their wives, and ran away. A lot of people never make it in this country. This is not a country that has been historically hospitable to the poor and wretched. So a lot of people right now want those things, whatever there is, they want it gone. You got to have, it's the survival of the fittest, the luck of the draw, the people who can make it, and a lot of people don't. But the 1%, I do truly believe, having read as much as I think I have, the 1% has always been there. It's not, poverty is not an anomaly in the United States. We have created a narrative of equality. It's always been, there's always been people who can't make it in America, and it's never been anything but. Sometimes they were Irish, sometimes they were Jews, sometimes they were Italians, sometimes they were now a different color now. But it's not a welcoming country, and you had to have luck and drive, true. But sometimes you had drive and you didn't have luck.
Over here.
Where are, oh yeah.
This morning, the class of '68 heard from the Dean of Student Life, or I think that's what her title was, about how they're trying to create a listening environment so people can respect each other. Is that likely to happen? And is there a way to build on? Is there a way to build on the fact that people don't want to get along with each other to move things forward in the American university?
I truly believe that the paradox is uniformity, everybody alike, mediocrity. Diversity, creativity and dissension. That you're gonna have to have dissension. I mean, there are only two species in this world that kill their own kind: the chimpanzee and the Homo sapien. You know, either we're a naked ape or we're God's creation. After 83 years, I don't know.
So,
But I mean, I mean, the campuses right now are roiled, and as long as we bring in people from all over the world with different images, it's going to be content. It's exciting, and we are the envy of the world.
see, I beg to differ with you. The black widow spider eats her husband after they mate.
Yeah. But that's only after mating. Hold this, yeah.
Yeah, I have one question having to do with, obviously we've seen cycles where the U.S. has let immigrants in and then shut the doors. But what about this current phenomenon, deportation? I mean, let's talk about that. Has
the
that
history of
occurred before?
America in 1930, we deported hundreds of thousands of Mexicans who were citizens. We put them on buses from the Northwest and drove them over the border, 29 and 30. A terrible, terrible record of driving people out of the country. The Japanese Americans in World War II, that's the separate. Half of them were American citizens. So we have done, we get carried away, and the majority of the people want it, and it happens. It's a struggle now because the country is so divided. Back then, not a person raised their voice. And you know, the country is not a country of the left. Norman Thomas got 2% of the vote. This country lands on the right no matter what. It's who we are. It's who Americans are. You may not be. We may be in a bubble right here. But if you look to find out who the other 300 million are, they are, you know, overwhelmingly people of faith. We got a mic over there?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
With the mic. Yeah. First of all, thank you for putting. It's always good to hear you talk, and thanks. It's good to be back, and it's good to help you. One of your great gifts is putting things in perspective. So thanks for putting this all in perspective.
Context. Think context.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. So what can we use with this context for today's problems and the issues we're using? What lessons do we need to find? I guess to bring the Muslims in and the Latino in, do we need to find people that we hate even more? Is that the lesson?
You know,
I mean,
we don't do policy well in this country. We have never done policy well. Social policies. I mean, one of the biggest failures was prohibition. We tried to make a social policy. That bombed. The best thing we probably ever did was the GI Bill. That worked. It actually worked. And I don't know. I have no answers. All I can do is look back and say where we came from. I have no dog in this hunt. I made it. I'm 83. My kids are, you know, I got my world around me. I look back and say, what a remarkable country. But we have screwed up a lot. We had a civil war, for God's sakes. Not every country does that. And yet here we are. Will we survive? I don't know. But it's certainly an interesting place that still has a higher percent of interracial marriage than any other country in the world, and is being tolerant. It's more tolerant than for any intolerant nation that ever existed. We do, though, believe our own mythology a little bit too much. But, you know, I don't have any answers. All I have is you can have an opinion. I don't have an opinion. All I know is what I see and what I've observed in the course of American history. And there's never going to be anything that's going to take Mary Dyer's monument away. They hanged her because she was a Quaker and she was a Protestant. An English Protestant, just like them. Yeah. Oh, we got hands. Everybody, so all of a sudden, everybody's got hands. Yeah.
I've got the talking stick. So through the history, it looked like a lot of our development and a lot of our industrialization was on the backs of immigrants. And my understanding is that our organic population growth is not going to be enough to sustain the workforce that we need today.
Our birth rates are sinking.
Right. So why wouldn't we support immigration for our own economy?
You know, the Wall Street Journal had a picture the other day of fruit rotting on the Imperial Valley. The editorial was enough said. The Wall Street Journal is the loudest exponent of open immigration. They want cheap labor. But there is something else in this country that is conservative and is not the Wall Street Journal. and the Wall Street Journal can't do a damn thing to change it. Because, there are enough people out there who vote who say we don't want them. So the congressmen do what their constituencies say. Here's the Journal, the biggest Republican voice in the country. All they want is more labor coming in. I mean, they got crab companies closing in Maryland because they got no pickers. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, so whoever's got a microphone.
What do you recommend for teaching young students about the history of this? How can we get that done?
Well, how young are you talking?
K to 12?
K to 12.
They even get
the American K to 12 system, half the schools are the best in the world and half are the worst in the world. And that's never going to change. You talk about American exceptionalism, we will always base it on the back of local taxes, and we always have local school control. There are 15,000 school districts in the United States, and there used to be 150,000. So you can't get Medford and Malden to agree on the same history book. So, what do we have, again, an anomaly, a system that is crazy. It has been broken for 300, 400 years. We will never, ever fix it. We will still produce a whole bunch of good kids and a whole bunch of kids who are not trained. We also have a system with 8,000 post-secondary school degree-granting institutions in this country. 1,500 are Bible schools that won't teach evolution. We have 1,500 community colleges where you can go relatively free and then transfer. 1 out of every 8 PhDs in this country started at a community college. We got faculty here, Phil Stark in biology, Gene Penvan in history, started at community colleges, went and got PhDs, became tenured faculty members here. So the community college is a great system. We have this great university system made up of every cockamamie kind of school, tiny, big, small, for-profit, not-for-profit, faith-based, evangelical, you name it, we got it. And it is so vast and chaotic that it can't be broken. But K through 12, it's local control. As long as it's local control, it's going to stay that way. Because the word education does not appear in the Constitution. We've never been an education nation. We just happen by luck to get the best university system in the world. Because Hitler destroyed his, and the rest of Europe. Yeah.
Speaking of the Wall Street Journal, you read the editorials, and they talk about universities as being hotbeds.
Oh, they dump all over it.
Of intolerance.
That's the 80s. That's the industry. And the class of 64 is responsible.
Well,
that's true. That's what happened.
Because they're talking about the hotbeds of intolerance because only progressive liberal thought is taught here. And I just want to get your reaction to all these editorials in the Wall Street Journal.
To me, it's all a lot of hooey. There are some faculty members that are stupid, have ideologies, but we've had faculty members who were eugenicists 100 years ago. We have faculty members who believed in the manifest destiny of the frontier. That was the stuff taught at Harvard, at Wisconsin, at the great universities. Nothing changes. The faculty at Jefferson's University of Virginia slept with loaded pistols under their pillows. They thought they were going to get murdered by a whole bunch of drunken students. But nothing changes. They're always adolescents. They're always between the ages of 17 and 21. They're all seeing pediatricians, and it's a madhouse. But for whatever reason, it's the envy of the world. But I mean, and the Wall Street Journal, it's an industry. When Alan Bloom in 1986 wrote The Closing of the American Mind, suddenly they stopped looking at John Belushi having a good time and said, all of these problems must be because of these goddamn liberal students and their goddamn liberal faculty. And who's the guy who wrote the People's History at Howard Zinn and Chomsky and all these leftists? Well, they've always been part of it. Sure, they've always been a handful, but there have always been a whole bunch of other kinds, and they'll pick out, they cherry pick. They cherry pick. The system, what other system in the world has got 1,500 faith-based institutions? Even in Massachusetts, we got Eastern Nazarene, we got Gordon, we got places, they don't exist anywhere else in the world. We've got everything here. It's a smorgasbord. You can go wherever you want. You want to go to Hillsdale, they don't take federal grants, go to Hillsdale.
I recently...
Okay, let's go. That's it. Thank you.